The universe possesses an accounting system. It is a ledger written in energy, not ink, and governed by a Newton-esque law of spiritual returns. For every ounce of suffering dispensed into the world, a shadow is cast, lengthening until it eventually eclipses the source. In the humid city of Calabar, this force is not abstract. The ancient balancer usually sleeps deep within the mud of the Great Kwa River, but the stench of unchecked arrogance wakes it. It is an emotionless entity, a hunter that wears faces like masks. It does not hate, it simply corrects. When the imbalance becomes too heavy on one side of the scale, the entity rises, shedding the river muck to cloak itself in the soft, pleasing flesh of the innocent and seeking out the source of the rot. Dr. Solomon Henshaw did not believe in ledgers or shadows. He believed in the tangible, the weight of naira notes in a brown envelope, and the oppressive silence of a locked office. He was the youngest professor in the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Calabar. It was 1996, a time when the military boot was on the neck of the nation, and power was the only currency that mattered. Solomon wore his authority like a tailored suit. He walked the corridors of the sprawling concrete campus with a strut that scattered students like frightened chickens. He did not view himself as a villain. In his mind, he was a harsh gardener pruning weak branches. Life out there, he would tell a weeping third-year student, leaning back in his leather chair as the ceiling fan cut through the air, is not for the fragile. If you cannot pay the price here, how will you survive out there? I am teaching you the cost of existence. The abuse was systematic. It was the click of the deadbolt sliding home on his office door. It was the way he would trace the rim of his glasses while a student pleaded for a passing grade, his eyes wandering over them with the detached hunger of a butcher eyeing a flank of beef. He demanded sorting, the illicit payment for grades, with a smile. For most students, it was cash, but for some girls, the currency was flesh. He broke them down methodically. He enjoyed the moment the light left their eyes, the moment they realized their intellect meant nothing against his red pen. He took their dignity and convinced himself he was hardening their shell. He noticed a girl in the back row of his Pole 314 class. She was new, striking in a way that made the air around her seem thinner. She sat in silence, her skin the color of polished mahogany, her eyes dark and unblinking. She did not take notes, she simply watched him. Solomon felt the pull immediately. It was a magnetic primal urge that bypassed his logic. He marked her paper with an F and instructed the class rep to summon her. When she arrived at his office, she did not cry, she did not beg. She stood before his desk in a simple dress, the humidity causing a sheen of sweat on her collarbone that Solomon found maddeningly alluring. "You know why you are here," Solomon said, his voice dropping an octave, the familiar script rolling off his tongue. He stood up, moving around the desk to encroach on her space. He expected the flinch. He expected the smell of fear, that sour metallic tang he had grown addicted to. Instead, she smelled of rain and wet earth. "I am here to pay," she said. Her voice was low, vibrating with a strange resonance that made the hairs on Solomon's arms stand up. "The price is high," he murmured, reaching out to brush a stray braid from her shoulder. His hand lingered. He felt powerful, potent, a god claiming his tribute. "I can afford it," she replied. He took her that very evening to his usual hotel. The room smelled of mildew and stale cigarette smoke, lit only by a singular yellow bulb. Solomon was frantic with a lust he couldn't understand. It felt less like desire and more like a fever. He locked the door and turned to her. She was standing by the bed, her back to him, unzipping her dress. "You are beautiful," Solomon breathed, loosening his tie, his hands shaking. "You see, this is how the world works. You give and you receive." "Yes," she said. The dress fell to the floor. "You receive exactly what you are due." She turned around. Solomon froze. The air in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. The silence that followed was absolute, swallowing the hum of the generator outside. Her face was still the face of the student, beautiful, high cheekboned, impassive. But her eyes had changed. The whites were gone, replaced by a sickly yellow, and the pupils had collapsed into vertical slits. "What?" Solomon choked, stepping back, his heel catching on the threadbare rug. At her waist, the human skin split open, with a sickening splunt. The sound was a wet, tearing noise, like raw meat being pulled apart. There were no legs beneath her hips. Instead, pouring out from the torn flesh of her human torso was a massive, undulating coil of muscle and scale. It was the body of a serpent, thick as a telephone pole, patterned in terrifying mosaics of earth brown and black. The human torso fused seamlessly into the reptilian horror. Solomon opened his mouth to scream, but the sound died in his throat. The creature moved with terrifying speed. The serpentine tail whipped out, knocking the table over. Solomon was lifted off his feet, the coils wrapped around him, one around his ankles, another around his chest, pinning his arms to his sides. The pressure was so immense, he felt his ribs groan, the cartilage straining under the crushing weight. "You speak of price," the thing hissed, its human face stretching, the jaw unhinging to reveal rows of needle-like recurved teeth. "You speak of teaching." Solomon gasped, his lungs compressing. "Please," he wheezed, the word a bubble of blood on his lips. "I am the lesson," the creature whispered, bringing its face inches from his. The forked tongue flicked out, tasting the terror on his sweat. The coils tightened. Solomon heard the distinct dry crack of his femur snapping. The pain was blinding, white-hot and absolute. He screamed then, a high, thin sound, but the creature simply watched, its slit eyes devoid of pity. Another crack at his pelvis, then the wet crunch of his ribcage collapsing inward. The creature did not tear him apart. It squeezed until the life was mechanically pressed out of his biology. It squeezed until his heart, compressed between shattered ribs, stuttered and stopped. Dr. Solomon Henshaw died in agony, in a hotel room, crushed by the weight of his own karma. But the story did not end with the cessation of his heartbeat. The creature released him, letting his broken form slump onto the dirty carpet. It loomed over him, its serpentine body filling the small room. Then it leaned down and breathed into his open mouth, a cooled, heavy vapor. Solomon's eyes snapped open. He could see the water stain on the ceiling. He could see the dust motes dancing in the slice of light from the window. He tried to blink, but his eyelids would not obey. He tried to scream, but his diaphragm was shattered, his lungs flat. He was dead. His body was a ruin of broken bone and still blood, but his mind was terrifyingly clearly awake. The creature began to shimmer, the scales receding, the legs returning, until the girl stood there once more, adjusting her dress. She looked down at him, at his wide, terrified, frozen eyes. "The debt is paid," she said softly. She unlocked the door and walked out into the humid Calabar night, leaving the "Do Not Disturb" sign on the handle. Solomon lay there. He could not move. He could not close his eyes. He felt the body begin to cool. Hours turned into a day. He felt the stiffness of rigor mortis set in, locking his broken limbs into their grotesque angles. He was a prisoner in a decaying house. He had the maid knock and move on. He lay there as the heat of the room accelerated the process. He felt the first bloating of his stomach. He felt the terrifying itch of microorganisms beginning their work inside him. He had taught his students that life was harsh. Now, he was learning that death was infinite.